I hereby call this meeting of Norwood City Council to order. Please rise for the prayer. Pledge of allegiance. Our Father, who art in heaven, as a body we congregate in this council chambers. We pray for thy divine guidance that we may do all things well according to thy holy will. Amen.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Mrs. Williams, please call the roll.
Mr. Bunzel.
Here.
Mr. Gabbard.
Here.
Mr. Geraci.
Here.
Mr. Kelsch.
Here.
Mr. DiNardo.
Here.
Mr. Thompson.
Here.
Mr. Braden.
Yes, ma'am.
All members present. Moving on to item E, amendment of agenda. We have two items to amend this evening. We have a letter from Mayor Schneider that we would like to add to the agenda under communications. And then item L1, we have a new attachment A, and we'd also like to move that up to J4. Mr. Thompson.
I would move that we amend the agenda as you stated.
Motion by Mr. Thompson. Mr. Braden.
Second.
Second by Mr. Braden. Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Bunzel.
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard.
Yes.
Mr. Geraci.
Yes.
Mr. Kelsch.
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo.
Yes.
Mr. Thompson.
Yes.
Mr. Braden.
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting aye. The motion passes. Moving on to item F, minutes of previous meeting, March 9th, 2021 minutes. Mr. DiNardo.
I move that we accept these minutes.
Motion by Mr. DiNardo to accept the report. Mr. Thompson. Second by Mr. Thompson. Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Bunzel.
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard.
Yes.
Mr. Geraci.
Yes.
Mr. Kelsch.
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo.
Yes.
Mr. Thompson.
Yes.
Mr. Braden.
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting aye. Motion passes. Moving on to item H, request to address council. We have Mayor Schneider with the presentation.
Thank you. I'm going to step up to the podium and ask that Elizabeth Banderas Rodriguez steps up also to the podium. And I guess, get over here by my microphone. We might as well call up the coach, Coach Stagnar, and the coaching staff. You guys get up here too. Come on. Come on, get up here. When you did this great feat and put Norwood on the map, well, I don't know if you got all that, but you did put Norwood somewhere we need to be. Actually, Eric Thompson and Coach Kelsch, in this manner, we call him Coach Kelsch. He's really Councilman Kelsch, but he does a lot of coaching, so we're going to throw that out there too. They both asked that the city recognize you in some way, shape, or form, and we put together a certificate of achievement. Coach, could you talk a minute about what it takes to become the girls' high school wrestling state champion? And come over here to the mic so other people can hear you, because I think it takes a lot of dedication, time, and effort.
Actually, it's really an incredible thing. Elizabeth had a dream and went to the athletic department to discuss it. The school board saw that she didn't have an opportunity, and they stepped forward and created the first sanctioned girls varsity team in the greater Cincinnati area. It's actually the most popular growing sport in the country, but Cincinnati did not have a team. You know, Norwood stepped up and gave her that opportunity, and she, through a lot of dedication and hard work, the other coaches put in an awful lot of time and effort over the last couple of years to help her through this. And just when she got to the point to be successful, she hurt her knee, and it required knee surgery. Some people told her possibly that you shouldn't compete this year. And one of the doctors said that she wouldn't hurt it worse, and they were going to have surgery anyway. So she went ahead and fought through that pain, and she had surgery 2 weeks ago. And here she stands, proud to lead the path for other young girls in Norwood.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Get over here so the camera, we can be on the camera. Coach Kelsch, you, as a council member, you wear a different hat, but as a coach, you understand the level of dedication and all of that. Do you want to say just a few things as a wrestler, as a coach? And
Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely a tremendous feat. Like Coach Sagmeyer said, and Coach Derek Alsop and Tyler Alsop here, they'll definitely tell you. Coach Tyler Alsop happens to be an NAIA All-American. So he definitely knows what it takes to get there. We all do. That's why we coach these kids and push them through the hardest times in their life. And what Elizabeth was able to do is just, it's tremendous. And hopefully that's something that's going to live with her for the rest of her life. Not only on the mat, but in school for the rest of her senior year, college after that, and every step she takes through her life, I think that's going to be there with her and push her and motivate her to get her to that next level of everything she does. So, congratulations, Liz.
thank you. So basically the plaque says you represent the best of Norwood High School and the city of Norwood. And I thank you for doing that. On Sunday, February 21st, senior Elizabeth Banderas Rodriguez became Norwood's first girls high school wrestling state champion and Norwood's first in any sport since 1996. Congratulations, great job. I agree. She got a standing ovation from City Council. That's pretty darn good. I don't know many people that have got.
Elizabeth? You got something to say?
Go ahead, step up. Don't be shy.
Yeah.
I just want to thank everybody. And that's about it.
Congratulations.
Good job, Liz.
Okay.
Yeah, great job.
Good job. Great job.
Moving on next, we have Andy Brossert, TIFs and our refinancing opportunities. Mr. Brossert.
I'll give the introduction for Mr. Brossert because we brought on financial advisors, Bradley Payne advisors, just at the beginning of my term. So Andrew Brossert is a partner with Bradley Payne Advisors specializing in local government, primary education, special district, and development financing. Critical need for the city of Norwood, especially when we have the Factory 52 project coming on board and many other projects in the pipeline that he's going to be involved in. Mr. Brossert directed the development and tax increment financing transactions and special district issues for Fifth Third. He has 21 years of experience in public finance and has significant experience with the region's leading issuers and has executed transactions approximating $15 billion. He's a registered municipal advisor and principal registered with the Municipal Securities Rulemaking Board and the Securities Exchange Commission, SEC. So he has all sorts of hoops that he has to jump through to keep that and to maintain it. And then another part is he was a varsity swimmer at Xavier, and he held a record, right, Andrew? He held a record. It might not be there anymore, but you were a record for many years, and he was a licensed CPA. So Andy brings a level of expertise that the city has not had for many, many years to put together the programs, the financing, and to work on the city's behalf, representing the city, working for us, to make sure that we get the best deal. And I really think he's put a lot of time and effort into the city of Norwood so far, and we hope to continue our relationship with him. So with that being said.
Thanks, Mayor. It's the nicest introduction I think I've been given. I don't think you're going to stand and clap after this presentation on TIFs and bonds, but maybe I might surprise you. Can you hear me okay through this? Is that all right if I pull this down a little bit? Okay.
Yeah, you're okay.
What we wanted to do tonight was go over, it gave you a glimpse of what's going to be coming your way in the next month to 2 months. When we first got involved with the city and met with the mayor and his team, and we noticed that there was a lot of opportunity for the city in terms of refinancings and the ability to use some of your existing TIF districts for projects for the city. You've used them before for economic development purposes. They've done their purpose, and now they're starting to spin off money, along with interest rates when these bonds were originally issued, were so high, and they were done as private placements at that point in time. Obviously, you've heard rates have come down. Now is a chance for us to refinance these because these TIF districts have stabilized, the development's stabilized, and it gives you an opportunity to keep some money now for other city purposes. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. We've been involved since I think back in September or August. We've put a lot of work into getting things, a lot of the TIF districts analyzed, projections. We're still working through a lot of it. Some of you have seen me already in the Finance Committee meetings and having those discussions. We've got the handouts on your desk here, looks like this, and we're just going to run through some of these briefly for you tonight. I wanted to give you an idea on that first page in terms of the interest rate chart, and this is what this looks like here. This is a range of the interest rates going back to 1990, and you can see in terms of what this represents from the yield curve going from year 1 to year 30. We were in one of the lowest times in terms of the yield curve or just interest rates in general. And so what this represents is the AAA curve, which is what all bonds are priced off of in the marketplace. But again, at one point in time, we've hit new lows throughout the year. We've come up a little bit over the last couple weeks, but still relatively low in terms of the historical perspective with rates. So it's a good time to be looking at these items. There's also a real desire for these types of bonds because investors aren't getting yield in their traditional GO voted bond issues, those types of really safe credit. So they're starting to reach a little bit for understanding TIF deals and how they work and the security behind them. And so there's more demand for that product as well. So again, you're going to see us throughout the year talking about different TIF districts, refinancings. Either the city might be doing them or the Port Authority might be doing them for different reasons, but we're going to talk about that tonight a little bit in terms of two of them. So no questions about the market right now. We're going to move on to page 4. This is something that we've laid out for you. This represents all your different TIF districts in this chart. And so we wanted you to have a kind of a simple, easy cheat sheet to go to that gives you the ability to look at this and know off the bat what's going on with each one of your TIF districts. We'll add another one here soon, PLK, if it's approved by the City Council here in the next couple months. But just for example, on Linden Point there, you can see at the very top of the line, and I'm not going to go through each one of these. You can study this later, and you're going to see me the next month over the next month and a half. We can ask questions again at the next meeting. But you can see there, we lay out when the TIF district started, when it ends, how much of the property is TIF'd right now. That's the exempted value. So for example, Linden Point, there's been $45.1 million in value created in the TIF district and is out there today. Gross collections for Linden Point is about $942,000. And we didn't put school compensation in there, but there's a school compensation arrangement there that's 25%. So we're looking at about $225,000 going to the school district off Linden Point alone. The original dated issuance on Linden Point, and there's two deals in there. One's a Paycor note, and one's the original Linden Point bonds that were issued were done back in 2010. Par that was issued in total was 7.2. Now we're down to 6.2 million. And the interest rates range from 6% to 7%. And so stop there because you can look across each one of those TIF districts and you see that, I mean, these are high interest rates, 6.7, 7.25, 6%, 7.5. This is why we're trying to attack these now, to get these bonds reduced, to free up more money, hopefully for the city to do other purposes with. Just sticking with Linden Point again, debt service due this year is $567,000, which in that TIF district alone, before we even do a refinancing, we're looking at about an excess cash flow of about $374,000. So pretty impressive, especially for that TIF district alone. Other items on there, down below, we let you know when the optional redemption call date, that's when we have the ability to refinance the bonds. For each one of those TIF districts and those bonds. And then we also list the school compensation because each one of these deals are a little bit unique in terms of how we comp the schools. In that case, with Linden Point, it's 25% of service revenues, so the TIF revenues that come in. You can see each one of those are different, all the way over to Brookwood, which is probably the most complicated one that we have for the city. Other than that, that's kind of a highlight of really just a snapshot of the summary of each one of your TIFs. Again, take a look at it. Feel free to reach out to me if you have questions on any of these. We'll be back again in probably the next meeting to talk about some legislation that's going to be before you, but we wanted to give you a cheat sheet for each one of your TIFs. Any questions on that at this point? Next page, we just circle where your TIF districts are at. I think a lot of you know the locations of them, but we just wanted to highlight the different areas. One of the reasons why we did this when we met with the city was the ability of the TIFs to be utilized for other purposes. And so one of the things that's a understanding of TIF districts is that you have to use the revenues within the district, and that's not necessarily the case. The district just has to benefit, or the new improvement has to benefit the TIF district. And so it could be a roadway project next to it. It could be all kinds of items as long as you define benefit back to that TIF district in terms of the new improvement that you might want to help utilize with the excess TIF revenues. We work with Bond Counsel, Pat Woodside from Frost Brown Todd, obviously going through the discussion, and that's something that we're going to be looking at as we go through the next couple of years with you, as this excess revenue will be available. In terms of the two refinancings we've been working on right now, and this is on page 6, the Cornerstone and the Linden Point TIFs. Cornerstone, we're going to walk through this, and again, we're just putting this out for you now because we want you to have the time to think about it, be ready to ask questions when we come back the next couple of meetings with legislation, and so that you're informed before we get to that point. But the issue on the Cornerstone TIF is that we're planning on using the Port Authority of Greater Cincinnati. The reason for that, the bonds were originally issued by the city. The refinancing is proposed to be done by the Port Authority because they have what they call a bond fund. And that bond fund acts like a security, kind of a credit wrap to the financing. So we get lower interest rates if we utilize their fund. It comes with a cost, so what we've got to do is evaluate the cost of doing that with the Port Authority compared to the cost of the city just doing it on your own. And in that case, because the revenues are so tight, we really need to utilize the bond fund to really help out that TIF district there. The savings on that deal is about 7.84% in savings. When we look at percentage savings and look in the bond market, whether or not we want to move forward with a refinancing or not, we typically look for 3 to 5% savings because it's not like your mortgage. We can't do this, whenever you like. We have certain set time frames when we can do these refinancings, and so there's what they call lockout periods or call periods. So 7.84 is a really good number in terms of pulling the trigger on that. The true dollar savings is about $588,000. NPV, it's $681, which average savings of about $53,000 a year. Cornerstone is not really going to be a benefit in terms of an annual cash flow to the city for refinancing. The benefit really is going to be to that office set up as it is, because right now they're paying about $1 million, the very last point down there in number 4, they're paying about a little over $1 million in debt service for the improvements that were done back in 2006. The TIF revenues are not there anymore because there's been several board of revision cases, so they brought the value down. The original developers sold the site, the two main buildings. The center building, I forget what it's called, but it's still owned by the original owners. None of them were aware of the fact that they had what they call minimum service payment obligations. And so they're to shell out on top of taxes about $250,000 this year just to make the bond payment because the city's not liable for that payment. And so they were very shocked. And so the whole reason and for the city for doing this is to obviously keep that cost low in terms of property taxes, hopefully keeping all those tenants in there who are paying income taxes to the city, and keep it a viable office complex is the goal here. At the end of the day, there will be some money left over when those bonds are paid off, but in terms of an annual basis, there's not going to be a whole lot of cash flow coming back to the city unless those building values increase. The other one that does have a lot of benefit to the city right now is the Paycor Linden Point TIF District, and those were issued in 2010. Savings on that is about 15.4%, so it's pretty good. It's about $1.3 million in just savings on the refinancing alone. Net present value, $964, and about $77,000 a year in savings. In terms of the cash flow on Linden Point, that's already doing well. There's excess cash flow coming in. But combining the refinancing with this, we're looking at about an MPV savings to the city that can be used for other purposes at about $4.7 million. So pretty significant. And there's actually still parcels, I think, out there to develop. But right now, that's what we're looking at in terms of Linden Point SIF District. We haven't decided Port Authority or non-Port Authority on that one. And part of the reason why is it's almost a break even if we do it just through the city the way it is now. The benefit of not doing it or doing it with the city right now is we can get this executed and done probably the end of April, early May. Our concern in looking at this is we've seen rates go up. We already have a buyer and we can lock in that rate now. So we've got another phone call. We have weekly phone calls with the Port Authority on these deals. We've got some more questions to ask tomorrow about that structure because they're putting some covenants in there that would restrict the city's ability to use that cash for other purposes. And we said, hey, well, that's not a deal for us that we like. So I think by the time we get back to you, the first meeting in April, we'll have a good direction of which way our recommendation would be to go on Linden Point. Any questions on that information? That's a lot of, I know we've been through the Finance Committee on this. Wanted to get this out in front of the whole council with a discussion about the two refinancings and see if you had any questions at this time. If you want to let it sink in, we'll be back again, like I said, in a couple weeks. Yes, sir.
I think you did last time at the Finance Committee meeting. You answered two questions which I thought was important for us to hear. The first is when I asked, well, when could we extract the value? And for Linden Point, I think 2036 was.
Linden Point, actually, the way, if we set this up with the city just being the issuer, the value can start to accrue next year. So, right now that SIF is performing. I think there's a balance built up in there already. So, that will start to accrue to the city immediately next year.
Yeah, and so you can't, to use it for any general purposes, you're right, 2036.
Maybe that was your question for general purposes. That's correct. Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, so that's right. But you can use it for other public improvements, streets around the area, water, sewer needs, those types of things.
And I think you did a good job with you saying, hey, this is available. We could start thinking about what can that be spent on, roads, or I think you started to get on that road. And then the other, comment was around the rates that we see here. I think you're writing 6 to 7% because in the time period between now and when we actually do this, rates could go up.
Yeah, right.
So it's just worth noting that I think you're giving ballpark.
Yeah, we are. The cornerstone is, we think that the rates that they're using are. So the way this works is the Port Authority has an underwriter that we've been working with. We think it's a bit aggressive, some of the rates that they have, they've shown, which is also sort of our concern about Linden Point, right? Because right now, if we're $20,000, I think $25,000, $30,000 better just doing it on our own. Why not lock it in and just get it over with and have less restrictions with the cash flow instead of waiting and have market risk until, they're telling us now maybe June, that might not close till. So a lot of money being pumped into the system. And so it's only kind of pushing rates up, I think. And so it's a concern.
Cool.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Mr.
Yeah,
Bonzo?
Mike, so just clarification. So are you acting kind of as a fiduciary to the city?
Yes, that's exactly what we are, correct.
Okay, great. And then, so who is responsible? And I know this is a minor part of this, but I do think it's important we talk about fees because none of us know what the normal fees are. I mean, we don't have, the fees aren't in this document. The Finance Committee got a document a month ago whenever we did it that had it. But are you responsible for ensuring that whatever, what we're being charged by the legal services and other places that it's appropriate for what's fair and customary, I guess is a good.
Yes, we are. And that's one of our concerns with, like I said, on Cornerstone, we're kind of backed into a corner. We've got to use them because we've got to get the rate down to make it the best deal for the office users. Linden Point, we've got options. And so one of the issues that came back recently on Linden Point was some of the fees increased. And so we asked the question why, and it wasn't a good answer. One of the fees, when we're trying to get this answer tomorrow, is the Port Authority fee charges 50 basis points a year to utilize their bond fund. Well, all of a sudden that went up to 55 basis points, and nobody can tell me why. And so, without a doubt, using the bond fund is a cheaper form of financing. But when you add all the cost up, as we went and talked to another investor, if the city would do it on their own and not use the Port Authority, it was a break even. Because we got rid of all the fees, we got rid of the annual fee from the port, and we got rid of the restrictions related to the annual revenues. And so all those factors playing in, yes, to your point, we check those fees to make sure they're accurate and that they're within the realm of these types of transactions. For example, if a bond counsel fee for something like this is $100,000 and somebody's trying to charge $250,000, which you've seen before, that's our responsibility to step up and say, listen, guys, that's not right. We're not doing that.
That makes me feel better. And then you mentioned, so I guess, is there any, I guess the leverage is that you have this other offer. So the Port Authority, they're not negotiating with you, basically. Are they playing hardball, I guess, on this?
We haven't had that discussion yet. That's tomorrow on the call. But, it's, like I said, the fees are one aspect of it. My concern really is what we've seen, in terms of the rates increasing over the last month to 2 months. The other side of this, too, is that, if Congress brings back advanced refundings, which they eliminated back in the Tax Reform Act, which means you can't refund a bond before the call date. Prior to getting rid of that with the Tax Reform Act, you could do that one time in the bond life of an issue. If they bring that back, what you're going to see is a flood of paper, municipal bonds, onto the market, everybody trying to go and refinance their bonds, advance refund their bonds at once. And so we've got concerns there with wanting to beat that, because I think it's going to come out at some point in time. There's a whole lot of other aspects that go into it just besides fees, but we want to make sure that it's the best deal for the city, not only in terms of economics, but also flexibility with revenues. And that's what we're discussing tomorrow.
Anyone else?
2 more slides for you, I promise. The other thing we wanted to talk to you about was the PLK development update. And we've been working, as the mayor mentioned, a lot on that project with the developer. On page 7, it's just the highlight of what the development deal is. And so this is what has been presented to the Finance Committee, and then now finally has gotten over to the school district, because they have a certain set of time frame once we officially give them notice that they can review the proposal. There's a CRA, which is a tax abatement on the site, which is the improvement, not the land, for 15 years at 100%. And then there's also overlaid on top of that a 30-year TIF district that is being negotiated with the school district. There's 2 forms of compensation on the school comp, one with the apartments and one with the commercial. And so for the first 15 years on the apartments, they're going to get about $72,000 a year guaranteed, and on the commercial they get about $50,000 a year guaranteed. On the commercial piece, that $50,000 goes on for the life of the TIF district, so it really actually goes on for 30 years. On the TIF district for the apartments, after the 15 years is up from 16 to 30, the school goes to 65% of what they would have gotten. And then after debt service is paid, they get another form of comp if there's money left over. And that is how the school district got comfortable with the transaction. I don't want to speak for them, they're reviewing this stuff now, but we've been in discussions with them over and over and over again, and this seems to be where they are okay with the transaction. The estimated bond issue size that is proposed to go through the Port Authority in this case is $6.7 million. That would net out $4.9 million to go to the project in terms of public improvements that they have identified. So that's where that stands. We'll be back before you with legislation as we come along here. In this case, if this does go through the Port Authority, and just like that other deal, you wouldn't be issuing a bond resolution. You'd be issuing a legislation that would enter into a cooperative agreement with the Port Authority that simply just states you're going to pass on the revenues to the Port Authority when they come in from the county auditor. and they will issue the bonds under a bond resolution at the Port Authority Board. The developer has also requested that as part of this, during the 15-year abatement, or the CRA, they are going to levy a special assessment on themselves to help pay for some of the bond interest costs for the bond that they want to issue through the Port Authority. They are proposing, or asking the city to, they'll be petitioning the city to form what they call a new community authority. And so this, probably the best way to describe this, and this is on the last page here, page 8, it's almost like an association, a homeowners association with extra powers, okay? It's a government entity. They have the ability to levy special fees. FC Cincinnati was done with a new community authority. I forget what the sales tax charge they have on food and beverage and products that will be sold there. There's also the ability to levy a hotel tax above the hotel tax. And so this is all incremental charges just on that side alone. They haven't really talked about a whole lot about those two items. I think that they've looked at a food and beverage charge for the brewery. But really they're utilizing it to charge them an extra property tax charge to help pay for some of the debt service that's being abated. So this takes action by City Council, and so there's a couple meetings that this has to go through in terms of public notice. It's a public body, and so there's representation assigned to it from the city, and so you get to put the majority of the people on that board, and then the development group puts their groupings, and so there's different ways that you can form them. The common one is the 7-person board, and so you'd have 4, they'd have 3, and that's how that works. Over time, as this development evolves and the developer, if they move on, that then shifts to residents there. The city still has representation, but the developer moves away, and then it's people who actually live there that are part of that board. We've got some information here on terms of things that they can do. They can issue their own bonds, tax exempt. They have the ability to, like I talked about, leverage to levy charges. It is subject to a public audit. It is a public board. It's a governmental entity, but it's been very popular in the Columbus region. Down here in Cincinnati, it started to sort of evolve. I think Warren County's got one up there for the Otterbein site. Liberty Center's got one. They're at the mall there in Liberty Township. City of Hamilton just put one in for their Spooky Nook indoor sports complex. So they're starting to evolve a little bit. And there's been some small deals, like Springdale did a very small one as well. So they're asking that to be a part of the development as it goes forward as well. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I definitely think this will be one where I think there's definitely going to need to be additional conversation about kind of how this works. Just an initial question. So, like, who manages their books? Is that like, would our city auditor, essentially, or our finance department, like, would we manage those books in the sense that, like, we do with our health department? There's two ways to do that. I've seen communities sort of lend out or charge for services of their own staff. I don't think that's really the best way. We've seen these evolve where I believe that the city's going to want to make sure they still have control of this thing so it doesn't get out of hand. But within these development charges, there's enough levied in there above whatever they need for debt service to pay for legal, accounting, audit, those types of things. That's in the budget and not coming out of anybody else's budget like the city's. And so that's how that's covered. Gotcha. Okay. And then when we say that they can do special assessments, special hotel taxes, so that would be the hotel tax specifically. That would be above and beyond any of our municipal hotel tax, right?
That's correct.
It wouldn't redirect the hotel tax that we have. That's new community board.
Yeah. So, for example, the Hamilton example, there's a 6% hotel tax up there. They levied an additional 3 on top of that, so now they're at 9. They also levied an additional, I think, 2% sales tax on food and beverage and retail sales. For example, I think FC Cincinnati, don't hold me to this, I think they're at 4%, something like that. So they vary across the area in terms of that amount. It's on the LCA or the NCA to collect that. And so it doesn't go through the state like the typical sales tax charge does. And a lot of times the charge for property taxes is the same way. It doesn't really necessarily go through the county auditor, although it could. But we've seen both ways work. I figured that was a new one for you, so we wanted to get that out there. If you need more information on it, we've got some white papers on it. Happy to get that for you. But wanted you to be aware of it before it hits you. I spoke with a developer, and I wasn't sure if you guys knew about it or not, so we said, hey, let's get it out in front of the council so they're aware of this, and we can start talking about it. I think that's all I got for you. The rest of this is disclaimer language that we have to put in here per the SEC. If you want to read it, have fun. Any questions?
Thank you.
Thanks, Andy. Thank you.
Yep. I got an extra copy for you. I didn't mark it, so.
Somebody will need it. I think Keith doesn't. Thank you. Thanks, Andrew.
Thank you.
I don't doubt it.
Moving on to item I, reports of standing committees of council. Committee of the Whole, March 16, 2021. Committee report, Committee of the Whole, dated 3/16/21, to the Honorable Council of the City of Norwood, Ohio. We, your Committee of the Whole, to whom was referred discussion of the financial recovery plan, beg leave to submit the following report. Councilman Eric Thompson requested a Committee of the Whole for the purpose of discussing the financial recovery plan with Auditor Jim Stith. Auditor Jim Stith and Mayor Victor Schneider were present at the meeting to answer questions posed by council members. Respectfully submitted, Ken Miracle, Chairperson, Mr. Bonzel, Mr. Braden, Mr. DiNardo, Mr. Gabbard, Mr. Kelch, and Mr. Thompson. Mr. Bonzel.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the committee report be received and filed.
Motion by Mr. Bonzel to receive and file the committee report. Mr. DiNardo.
Yes, please. Second.
Second. Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Bonzel?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Geraci?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting aye, motion passes. Moving on to item J, third reading of ordinances and resolutions. Item J1, ordinance reauthorizing the mayor and/or safety service director to enter into amended easement agreement with Regent Realty LLC for Schoolhouse Outfitters LLC as originally authorized in ordinance number 35-2014 and declaring an emergency. Mr. Bonson.
Thank you, Mr. President. Before we take action, if you don't mind, I was hoping that we might hear from the law director. We had a request out to, I guess it was representatives of school outfitters, to potentially just put some language just protecting, no matter what, the right-of-way access to the Wasson Way on both Spencer Avenue and Regent Avenue. And I was just hoping if Mr. Moore might be able to let us know what's coming up.
Mr. Moore?
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Bonzel raised this with me, I don't know, a little while ago. And to be honest, it's my understanding that this is something that was passed, and we're not sure if it was signed. And so they wanted to record it, so we were going to both repass it and sign it. And I don't believe there's really any downside. I think that they've already occupied all of the space they're going to, and there are pedestrian trails that lead to Wasson Way at this point. But reading the property description, I can't guarantee that. And so I sent an email to the representative saying, hey, can we just add a sentence into the agreement, the easement agreement that says that the pedestrian access is going to be maintained? And I think I sent that earlier last week, and then I went on vacation. And we're still waiting to hear back. So, you know, it's up to councils whether or not they want to move forward at this point.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Mr. Bonzel?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. President. I would personally recommend, again, I don't think school outfitters would ever take any action to, they've invested in the trail, but they may not always own that building. And the easement, from what I've understood, goes with the building if they sell it. So I would make a motion to table this ordinance until, or whatever the exact motion is, but to postpone it basically until our next scheduled council meeting. April 9th.
Or could just wait until he hears back.
Yeah, I mean, that's, it'd be April 13th. Yeah, I mean, that's an option.
I
I'm
hope,
sure
I
we're
hope
gonna-
it's within a week or so. But
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure we're going to hear back from them. I'd say just
Okay.
move it to our agenda then, and potentially, though, if they do agree to that, we'd have to change the, would we have to change any part of this?
I think the ordinance would be fine. I see attached or incorporate, I'd have to read through this and amended. I'm hoping this says essentially that with, substantially similar to what's attached. It's basically just adding a sentence. So I think it'd be fine. Council could move forward. It'd be very easy to do if we tabled it until the next council meeting for the third reading.
Yeah,
So the motion on the floor by Mr. Bonsall is to table the third reading until the next regular council meeting.
yes.
Second? Mr. Braden?
Yes, sir. I'll second that.
Any further discussion? Please call the roll.
I'm sorry, you're tabling, the motion on the floor is to table the third reading until what date?
The next regular council
Oh,
meeting.
okay.
What was the date?
April 13th.
13th. Until April 13th meeting.
Okay. Thank you.
Please call the roll.
Mr. Bonsall?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Geraci?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes.
Mr. President, voting aye, motion passes. Item J2, a resolution accepting the Montgomery Road redevelopment plan. Mr. Thompson.
Motion, we have the third reading of this ordinance.
Motion by Mr. Thompson to have the third reading. Mr. DiNardo.
Second, please.
Second by Mr. DiNardo. Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Bonsall?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Geraci?
No.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting, we have 6 ayes, 1 no. Motion passes. And we have the third reading.
A resolution accepting the Montgomery Road redevelopment plan.
Thank you, Mrs. Williams. Mr. Bonsall.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the resolution be passed.
Motion by Mr. Bonsall to pass the resolution. May I have a second? Mr. Gabbard.
I second the motion.
Second by Mr. Gabbard. Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Bonsall?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Geraci?
No.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting, we have 6 ayes, 1 no. The resolution passes. Moving on to item J3, ordinance authorizing the Safety Service Director or Mayor to bypass the competitive bidding process and enter a software-as-a-service agreement with PL9 Incorporated to provide software and support for records management and analytics system for the City of Norwood Police Department and declaring an emergency. Mr. DiNardo.
I would like to make a motion to have the third reading.
Motion by Mr. DiNardo to have the third reading. Mr. Thompson.
Second.
Second by Mr. Thompson. Any discussion? Mr. Tracy.
I guess I wish I would have thought about this 2 readings ago, but I wish we could have gotten a presentation on how the software is actually operating and works and to see its functionality, but we're here now, so.
Thank you, Mr. Tracy. Anyone else? Please call the roll.
Mr. Bonsall?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Geraci?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting aye, the motion passes. Mrs. Williams, may we have the third reading?
Ordinance authorizing the Safety Service Director or Mayor to bypass the competitive bidding process and enter a software-as-a-service agreement with PL9 Incorporated to provide software and support for a records management and analytics system for the City of Norwood Police Department and declaring an emergency.
Thank you, Mrs. Williams. Mr. Braden.
A motion, we pass the ordinance.
Motion by Mr. Braden, pass the ordinance. Mr. DiNardo.
I'd like to second, please.
Second by Mr. DiNardo. Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Bonsall?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Geraci?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson? Mr. Braden?
All members present voting aye, the ordinance passes. Moving on to J4, Ordinance approving the Fourth Amendment to the detailed financial plan for the city of Norwood and declaring an emergency. Mr. DiNardo.
I'd like to make a motion, if this is, we're talking about the one that we are presented here, like on the table.
Yes.
I'd like to make a motion, we have all 3 readings of this version, please.
Motion by Mr. DiNardo to have all 3 readings. May I have a second? Mr. Kelch?
Second.
Any discussion?
Again?
Mr. DiNardo.
I think spoke to each of you guys, but the short version is the differences between what we saw at the committee of the whole and here are a series of assumptions that were used, that Mr. Smith just used, and they were actually pointed out by the state auditor to be overly conservative, to be honest. And there are things like the fuel rates or some of the step-ups that were used in salaries and things like that. As I said, we're really aggressive, so it ended up being money that we could put back, or they're seen as savings, but remember, this is all a budget. And so that was felt towards the back half of the plan, and that was baked, and that money was baked in on the back half of the plan to capital improvement projects, particularly parks and the rec center and things like that. So that was really the only changes, but from what we heard last Tuesday, but substantially all the form and function of it still remains the same. It was just some of the assumptions used and some of the costs were updated by the state. So I feel very confident that what we discussed, the 6 of us discussed on Tuesday, remains substantially there, and we should pass this.
Thank you, Mr. DiNardo. Anyone else? Mr. Bonzo.
Thank you, Mr. President. Yeah, I will just say that I think this plan is exciting for the city. I'm looking forward to, residents, learning more about all of the capital improvements that are going to be made over the next few years. I think that's extremely exciting. As well, on the street fund, it's, kind of continues on what we've done since, we did the first plan, which is, or I guess the second version of the plan, which is essentially, our street fund is just capital dollars. I mean, there's 98% of it's just going to be used to repave streets. And specifically this year, it authorizes up to $2 million in spending on streets, which is a lot of streets that can be done. I doubt that they're going to be able to use all of that this year. It's likely that some of that's going to be carried over into next year. But the good thing is that there is money for streets, and I think citizens are going to see lots of projects being done. So it's exciting. It's about darn time, and I just want to say I'll be supporting this for sure.
Thank you, Mr. Bonzo. Anyone else? Mr. Tracy.
There's still some things I don't like in it, but I wasn't at the committee of the whole meeting because of class, so I really don't have a say in it, so.
Thank you, Mr. Tracy. Anyone else? Please call the roll.
Mr. Bonzo?
Yes.
Mr. Goward?
Yes.
Mr. Geraci?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting aye. Motion passes. Mrs. Williams, may we have all 3 readings?
Ordinance approving the Fourth Amendment to the detailed financial plan for the city of Norwood and declaring an emergency. Ordinance approving the Fourth Amendment to the detailed financial plan for the city of Norwood and declaring an emergency. Ordinance approving the Fourth Amendment to the detailed financial plan for the city of Norwood and declaring an emergency.
Thank you, Mrs. Williams. Mr. Braden.
Motion, we pass the ordinance.
Motion by Mr. Braden to pass the ordinance. May I have a second? Mr. DiNardo. Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Bonzo?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Geraci?
No.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting. We have 6 ayes, 1 no. The ordinance passes. Moving on to item J5. Mr. Moore, quick question. This is the one that we voted on the first and second reading last week. But the one we just voted on superseded that. So should we remove that from the?
I would Somebody make a motion to remove that. from the agenda.
Thank you. Mr. Thompson?
I would motion that we remove J5 from our agenda.
We have a motion from Mr. Thompson. Do I have a second? Mr. Bonzel?
I'll second that.
Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Bunzel?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Geraci?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present, voting aye, motion passes. Moving on to item L2, resolution declaring it necessary to levy a tax in the excess of the 10 mil limitation and to notify the Board of Elections of Hamilton County to cause the notice of the election to be given as required by law on the question of levying of an 8 mil renewal property tax for the current operating expenses of the city of Norwood and declaring an emergency. Mr. DiNardo.
Make a motion that we have the first reading, please.
Motion by Mr. DiNardo to have the first reading. May I have a second? Mr. Bonzel?
I'll second.
Any discussion? Mrs. Williams, please call the roll.
Mr. Bunzel?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Geraci?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present, voting aye. The motion passes. Mrs. Williams, may we have the first reading?
Resolution declaring it necessary to levy a tax in excess of the 10 mil limitation and to notify the Board of Elections of Hamilton County to cause a notice of election to be given as required by law on the question of levying an 8 mil renewal property tax for the current operating expenses of the city of Norwood and declaring an emergency.
Thank you, Mrs. Williams. Moving on to item M, administrative reports. Mayor Schneider.
Thank you. I'll be brief because I do want to go into executive session a little bit later on. But I saw some of you involved with the Montgomery Road cleanup that took place on Saturday. The Norwood lateral cleanup is taking place right now. Not right now. They're off now, but they are taking care of the Norwood lateral and cleaning that up. Parks cleanup is this weekend, Saturday from 9 to 11. If you look around the community, you see the signs that talk about the parks cleanup, and it shows on the sign, an outline. It's sort of like one of you had the city of Norwood's outline in there. Was that yours, Ken? But it shows the city of Norwood's outline, and then it has a star where all our parks are, and we've got a lot of parks. So we need your help. We need everyone's help. So call a friend, call in a neighbor. This is like, I guess, the millionaire thing where you can call a friend or cash cab. But call a friend and ask them to come out and help with that cleanup of the parks. It really is sort of it's a feel-good event. You do feel like you did your public service for the day. So that's this Saturday. I know I saw the parks crew, or not the parks crew, but the street crew out today with the trailer, putting hot patch out. They've been all over the place. I see a lot of areas where they've repaired streets. But it doesn't hurt to help them. And when I say help them, use See-Click-Fix. If you see something that needs to be repaired, use your telephone, take a picture of it, and send it in to Public Works. Last Saturday, I did 5 of them. Actually, I think 3 of them have been completed. The one, I saw them working on the street on the actual thing that I took a picture of on Montgomery Road. They're making that repair right now. That system works, and we've got quite a few good comments back on it. You send in a picture, you send in something that needs to be fixed, and they send you back an email saying, hey, we received it, and it gets taken care of. And it really does help. So like I said, I'll keep it brief. Got some staffing issues to go over here in a little while, and that's about it. If you got a couple of questions for me, I'm willing to answer a few.
Any questions? Mayor Schneider. Mr. Tracy.
Through the chair to the mayor, I'm not sure, I was going to bring this up in new business. Signs entering the city that say welcome to Norwood, would that just be an administration process?
What do you mean?
As far as putting up signs that say welcome to Norwood?
Well, there's signs.
Updating the signs, I guess. Would that have to go through a committee, or would that go just through administration to do that?
the administration would put up the Welcome to Norwood signs if there's one missing. We've replaced some of them that were worn out. Some of them had stickers put on them last year. We put money in the budget to put new City of Norwood signs up, but it's really an as needed. If it doesn't look good, then we're going to replace that sign. Is that what you're asking for?
I don't know. I'm trying to figure out how to state it. You know, is it a parks and recreation thing? Is it a public lands thing? Is it something that can be discussed through council to?
I mean, if you see a sign that says "Welcome to the City of Norwood" that does not look good, perfect application for a C-click fix. Send that to Public Works, and then they would put a new sign up. If that's what you're asking. If you're asking where the money comes from or who does it, Public Works installs new signage. So does that answer the question?
I'll discuss it after the meeting.
Okay.
Anyone else? Any questions for the mayor? Comments? Thank you, Mr. Schneider.
Thank you.
Moving on to N, unfinished business. Any unfinished business? Mr. Tracy.
I'll send an email to Clerk of Council as well for this request, but I would like to have all the applications for the nuisance Board of Appeals placed on the next council meeting agenda. Have all the applications placed out for the candidates and have them all sent out at one time to the candidates via email as well.
I'm sorry, so to
I'll send you an
confirm,
email.
you're asking for copies of all the resumes to be sent to the council members, correct?
Yes, all at one time if possible.
Oh, okay, and not necessarily put on the agenda, or put on the agenda to
Put
vote
on
on?
the agenda for discussion and vote.
Okay.
Anything else? Any further old business? Unfinished business? Then we'll move on to item O, new business. Any new business? Mr. DiNardo?
Yep. A bit of a shout out, really. When we were talking 2 meetings ago about the Wasson Way, I think I heard one specific and one kind of another resident allude to Burwood Park being kind of swampy and things like that. And that was and at times is true. However, I recommend all Norwoodians kind of take a drive down to Burwood Park lately. I think you'd see Mr. Zimmerman and Mr. Murphy and all that crew kick butt and did the drainage that we had discussed, 5 months ago. I think they did that cheaper, mostly in-house. They did address the pool. They cleaned up a lot of that area. I think it is it's a safer, it's a drier, and it's a really good look compared to, I'd say even 3 months ago. So shout out to our crews for kind of really going above and beyond, in my opinion, and making a park that's kind of in my neighborhood look really special. And I think it complements Wasson Way really, really well. So.
Could I piggyback on this? The big excavator equipment is still blocking the entrance off.
Yeah, I kind of had to drive
But there are plans in place to repave where that was all damaged as the trucks came out and stuff. So there's plans in place, but it does look a lot better, yes.
Yeah, and I'm really proud of them. So they did good. So I just wanted to address that. I heard some comments, and they have been valid, particularly in the past. But I think there's been a lot of headway recently. So
Thank you, Mr. DiNardo. Anyone else? Mr. Geraci?
I'll probably regret this one, but I'd like to request a Housing, Health, and Public Safety meeting next Tuesday, March 30th, if possible. On the agenda.
I won't be available.
Okay, how about Monday?
I won't be available till Friday next week.
Friday? I mean, that's Good Friday, I'd say.
Yeah, it's probably bad.
Okay, well, I won't call a meeting then.
Well, I mean, but what about,
What about before council
or the following Tuesday on the 6th.
Yeah, we don't have there's
We don't have a council meeting.
There's 2 weeks in between, or 3 weeks in between.
Yeah, we have an usher Tuesday.
That's the start of my clinicals.
Oh,
What about that Monday?
I can do the 6th. We'll do the 6th. That's fine.
What time?
What time?
7.
I mean, the later the better, so I mean, for you, 7's fine.
Where will that be held?
We'll hold it here. It's going to be a discussion, we don't have a meeting that week. Discussion regarding the Board of Appeals for the nuisance properties. I'd like to invite the Safety Service Director and any members of the task force that have been chosen to work that task force.
So is it, I apologize, still going to be here in the community center?
Yes.
Okay.
Due to potentially 5 to 6 other people being.
Any other new business? Mr. Gabbard?
yeah, Pastor James texted and asked if I could, since he couldn't be here, just announce that Elevation in Richmond is continuing their Black History movie series this Saturday night, 7 p.m. You can catch that via Zoom and watch the movie called Safety. You can go to www.elevationsinrichmond.com and go to the events section and get the movie link and details there. Any questions, you can reach Kirsten James at 513-485-4675 or Pastor James at 497-8843.
Thank you, Mr. Gabbard. Any further new business? We'll move on to communications. P1, Ohio Division of Liquor Control regarding transfer of liquor license. Mrs. Williams.
We got a letter from the Ohio, or a communication from Ohio Division of Liquor Control. It's a notice to legislative authority noting a request for I believe it's a transfer of a liquor permit. And just requesting whether the city was asking for a hearing on the issuing of the permit or not. So a copy was sent to everyone via email.
Mr. Bonzo.
Thank you very much. So I would move that we receive and file the letter or the request and check that we do not request a hearing.
Motion by Mr. Bonzo to receive and file and check that we do not request a hearing. Mr. Gabbard.
I second it.
Second by Mr. Gabbard. Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Bonzo?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Geraci?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting aye. Motion passes. Moving on to item P2, letter from Mayor Schneider.
Can I, on this letter, Ken?
Yes, sir.
This says specifically for the Norwood Recreation Department, Recreation Director, but I don't want that to be specific. I want it to address personnel issues, which falls within what can be done there. I don't want to be stuck to only talk about one position. I want to be able to talk about other positions. So I would ask that this letter states that I'm asking to go into executive session to discuss personnel issues as allowable under the Ohio Revised Code.
Thank you, Mr. President. Executive session is permitted to discuss, to consider the appointment, employment, dismissal, discipline, promotion, demotion, or compensation of a public employee or official. And so if council wants to talk, we want to talk about, here are some candidates, or what kind of, here are some candidates, which ones to talk about, which ones are more qualified than others, that's allowable. Or if we're going to discipline somebody and talk about whether or not discipline is okay, that's allowable in executive session. But employment matters, personnel matters is way broader than that. So it would really have to narrow that down to something more specific. It doesn't necessarily have to be just the recreation director. We could talk about, you could have a conversation about whether or not we're going to appoint people for, or certain people for, building inspector or building commissioner, recreation director, or economic development director. That would be fine. But the idea of like, well, I think I want, because personnel matters also includes all of the discussions we had at the beginning of last year about which personnel positions we should have and what their compensation should be. That kind of conversation you can't have in executive session. So just as a warning, if council wants to go into executive session to talk about the appointment of people to particular positions, that's fine.
So if I revise this to say, I'm sorry. Go ahead. If I revise this to say, I want to talk about the employment, compensation, appointment of people to the mayor's staff, is that too broad?
That would be permissible. I think permissible as far as the motion. We just want to make sure that that's what the conversation is about. It's the kind of thing that can invite other tangential issues to come in.
So would we make a motion to remove Recreation Director and the Norwood Recreation Department to mayor's staff?
I don't think we need to edit the letter. I think that we just need to make a motion to go into executive session for the specific reasons.
Do we want to receive and file this letter?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I'll just make it. So I move that we receive and file the letter and that we go into executive session to consider the appointment, employment, dismissal, discipline, promotion, demotion, or compensation of a public employee or official.
Under Ohio Revised Code.
Or official, public employees or officials. There's multiple people I want to talk about here.
Okay, public employees or officials.
Under Ohio Revised Code 12122G1.
Exactly, yes.
Okay.
Can we repeat that one more time, guys? I just want to make sure that this is
Make sure we get it right.
there. Yeah.
Okay.
So it's going to be a motion that council go into executive session to consider the appointment, employment, and compensation of, so what's that last part?
What do you want? I mean,
Employees under the mayor's staff, under the mayor's direction.
Okay.
Pursuant to
Yeah.
the Ohio Revised Code
Yep.
121.22G1. So that's to receive and file and go in executive session. Right?
Sounds good.
Mr. Bonds. Mr. Brady.
I'll second that.
Second by Mr. Brady. Any discussion? Mr. Dracy.
The only concern I have is that the letter states one thing and we're voting on another thing. If we receive and file the letter and go into an executive session discussing something other than what the letter states, that put us in a
Mr. Moore?
bind?
Thank you, Mr. President. The fact that the mayor requests an executive session doesn't mean council has to have one. And council can have an executive session as long as it's grounds covered by, that are allowed under the Ohio Revised Code. Council can vote to go into an executive session for any one of those grounds, regardless of what any request might be. So it's fine, there's no problem with
I think my question is
that.
that the letter states the recreation director, but we've changed it to go into executive session. Is that putting us in a bind if somebody
Just
Mr. Moore?
challenges it?
No, I don't see how.
Okay.
If the mayor has, the letter says, I want to go to executive session for this. He showed up today and said, I'd really like to talk about more than one position. And council's deciding to go in executive session to discuss more than one position. I don't see a problem with that.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Any other discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Bunzel?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Dracy?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson? Yes. Mr. Brady?
Motion passes to receive and file the letter, and we're going into executive session. out of executive session. Mr. Gabbard.
If I could make a motion that we allow the mayor to offer the new Director of Recreation to start at a pay rate of $60,000.
Motion by Mr. Gabbard, Mr. Kelch.
Second?
Second by Mr. Kelch. Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Bunzel?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Geraci?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present, voting aye, the motion passes. Moving on to R, adjournment. May I have a motion for adjournment? Mr. Thompson.
Motion that we adjourn this meeting.
Mr. DiNardo, second. Please call the roll.
Mr. Bunzel?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Geraci?
No.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Braden?
All members present, voting. We have 6 ayes, 1 no. Motion passes. We are adjourned.